My name is Linda. I'm 56 years old now. When I look back at my life, the first thing I see is Michael. We met when I was 28. I was independent, self sufficient, and had a clear vision of what I wanted from life. But somehow, he fit into that vision. He was charming, successful, and steady. Or at least that's how it seemed at first. We got married after 3 years of dating, and I think we both believed that we were doing everything the right way. Our relationship was built on compromise and understanding. Michael was the type to work long hours and travel for business. I stayed home, took care of the house, kept everything in order, and made sure we had a secure foundation to build our future. We bought our house about 5 years into our marriage. It wasn't a dream house, but it was practical, and we made it our home. The furniture was bought together, decisions about redecorating made after long discussions. We didn't argue about anything, or so it seemed. We were a team. We started putting money into a retirement account when we were in our late 30s. It wasn't much at first, just small amounts every month, but it grew over time. By the time I was 50, we had a decent nest egg saved up. The house was paid off. Our future looked secure. I could imagine us retiring, spending time traveling, maybe even buying a smaller place closer to the beach when the time was right. Nothing unusual about that. It was exactly what everyone wanted, right? Stability, comfort, and peace. For years, I never questioned anything. We didn't have much debt, and even when bills piled up, Michael would help pay them when he could. I handled the majority of the finances, but I always thought he was keeping track of his share. We were a partnership, or so I told myself. But then something strange happened. I received a letter from the bank one morning, a balance statement. I opened it expecting the usual figures, but the numbers didn't add up. We had been saving for years, contributing to our joint account and our retirement funds. But this statement showed something different, a line item I didn't recognize, a payment of a significant amount, one that neither of us had discussed. It didn't feel right. The figures were wrong. It didn't fit with what I had been tracking. I didn't say anything at first. I thought it was just a mistake. Maybe the bank had made an error. After all, it wasn't the first time something like that had happened. But the more I looked at the statement, the more uneasy I felt. The numbers just didn't align with the way we'd always done things. Something was off. I told Michael about it the next evening over dinner, casually, as if I were just checking in about something small. Michael, I said, looking over at him from across the dinner table, I noticed something strange in the bank statement. There's a charge I don't remember. Did you make any withdrawals recently? He paused for a moment, fork halfway to his mouth, his expression unreadable. The bank must have made a mistake, he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. I'll call them tomorrow and figure it out. I nodded, trying to read his face, but I couldn't decipher his reaction. I knew him well enough to know when he was being truthful, and this didn't feel like the usual "I'll take care of it" response. I didn't press him further that night, but something gnawed at the back of my mind. That evening, I went to bed with a slight discomfort in my chest. The next few days passed uneventfully. I didn't hear any more about the bank, and Michael seemed to have forgotten the conversation. But I hadn't. Something in the pit of my stomach told me that the answer wasn't as simple as a bank error. It was like a tiny flickering light that I couldn't ignore, and every time I tried to push it away, it got a little brighter. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, that there was something more to this than just a simple mistake. The next day, when he was away on one of his business trips, I found myself standing in the hallway looking at the old laptop we kept for backup. It had been sitting in the corner for years, untouched, as Michael always used his more up-to-date devices. But in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. It wasn't about snooping, not exactly, but I had a feeling I couldn't shake, a feeling that the truth was buried somewhere, and I needed to dig it up. I sat down at the desk, opened the laptop, and typed in the standard password. It opened right up. I knew Michael's password. I'd known it for years. He never changed it, never had a reason to. I didn't expect to find anything, but the moment the laptop powered up and I clicked through the files, something caught my eye. I scrolled through the folders, not really expecting much, but then I saw it. There, hidden in a file labeled Personal, was a folder marked Translation History. My heart skipped a beat. Why was this folder here? It was unlike anything I had seen before, especially considering Michael's tendency to keep work and personal matters separate. I opened the folder and scrolled through the list. The first file was from 7 years ago, titled simply Transfer Details. My hand hovered over the mouse. Why would Michael have this saved on a laptop no one ever used? Slowly, I clicked on it. My eyes scanned the page, and what I saw made me freeze. It wasn't a simple transaction log. It was something much more intricate. There were payments, small amounts at first, but as the years went on, the sums grew, and the name attached to these transactions wasn't Michael's. It wasn't even our shared account. It was another name, one I didn't recognize, with no clear connection to our family. I sat back in the chair, the weight of what I was reading slowly sinking in. This wasn't just a mistake or an error. This was deliberate. Michael had been transferring money, not to our joint accounts, but to someone else's, and the amounts had been building up over the last several years. I closed the laptop slowly, my mind racing. I had a lot to think about, and the first thing I realized was this: Michael had been hiding something, and now I needed to figure out what. But I wasn't panicked. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I wasn't even angry. I was just coldly calculating, trying to piece together what had been going on right under my nose for all this time. I wasn't going to confront him right away. No, I needed more information. If Michael thought he could pull something off without me noticing, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I closed the laptop and set it aside. Tomorrow was a new day, and it was time to start digging deeper. The next few days were a blur as I tried to maintain the normal rhythm of life, pretending everything was fine. Michael continued his business trips, coming and going with his usual excuses, his always present charm. But nothing felt the same. I had seen too much now. The gap between the life I thought I was living and the reality that was unfolding before me was growing wider by the minute. I kept replaying what I had seen on the laptop, those transactions, the slow accumulation of money into someone else's account. Small amounts at first, but then increasingly larger sums over the years. I couldn't shake the image of that name. Not someone I knew, not someone I recognized. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deliberate this was. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't just a small slip-up in our shared financial routine. This was planned. Michael had been making a choice, more than one choice, and I had been blind to it. Still, I didn't confront him, not yet. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of thinking he could manipulate me into a confrontation. No, I needed more. I had to be sure before I made any move. Then came that evening, the evening that would set everything in motion. I was tidying up the study when I noticed something odd. Michael's briefcase was left open on the desk, his passport resting inside. That was unusual. He was heading out on a business trip the following morning, so he had already packed the night before. But the briefcase was still sitting there, open. And in the corner of the briefcase, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A folder labeled Plans in Michael's unmistakable handwriting. I almost didn't want to open it. I had already seen enough to know that this wasn't going to be good, but I couldn't resist. My fingers moved without thinking. I carefully pulled the folder out and opened it. Inside, there were several documents, legal ones, contracts, and a few receipts, none of which made sense to me at first glance. But then I noticed a familiar name on one of the papers. It was the same name as the one attached to the bank account, the one that had been receiving the money. The document was a trust agreement. I skimmed it, my eyes darting over the legalese. The name on the trust agreement was not Michael's nor mine. It was for the person whose name had been appearing on those transactions. But there was more: an account number, a contact email, and some details about financial transfers. I sat down heavily in the chair, trying to absorb it all. It was clear now. Michael hadn't been saving money for us. He hadn't been setting aside funds for a rainy day or for retirement. No, he had been setting it aside for someone else. A friend, a trusted business associate, as one of the documents described them. My pulse quickened as I reread the papers. This wasn't just a casual arrangement. Michael had been systematically saving money for someone else, using the trust to hide his tracks. He was preparing for something, but it wasn't for us, for our future. It wasn't for the life we had built together. It was for his escape. I closed the folder and set it down. My mind raced. I had to think. Michael wasn't just making small withdrawals here and there. This wasn't a passing affair or an impulse. He had been planning this for years. I could feel the pieces falling into place: the lies, the secrecy, the carefully orchestrated transactions, and I hadn't even known. I knew then that this wasn't just about money. This was something much deeper. Michael had been living a double life, and I had been the fool, completely unaware. But I wasn't going to be the fool any longer. I sat back in my chair, taking a deep breath. It wasn't time to confront him. Not yet. I needed more information, more evidence, before I made any kind of move. But one thing was clear: Michael had underestimated me. I knew him better than he thought, and I was going to use that to my advantage. It was time to dig deeper. The next morning, after Michael left for his meeting, I started my plan. First, I went back to the laptop. I opened up the Translation History tab again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I scrolled through more of the documents, saving them onto a flash drive. The contracts, the receipts, the email correspondence. I needed everything. If I was going to have any chance of making this work in my favor, I couldn't afford to miss a single detail. I didn't know what he was planning exactly, but I had a feeling it had to do with that trust agreement. He was setting up a new life for himself, a life without me, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Once I had everything I needed from the laptop, I turned my attention to another important piece of the puzzle: the finances. I knew that Michael kept a detailed record of our shared accounts, but I had never thought to look deeper. Now I needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening. So I made an appointment with a financial advisor to go over our accounts in more detail. I wanted to know exactly how much money had been transferred and where it was going. I wasn't sure yet how I would use this information, but I was certain it would be crucial when the time came. A few days later, after Michael had returned from his business trip, I had gathered all the necessary information. I didn't show any signs of what I had discovered. I didn't confront him yet. I was patient. I was playing the long game. That evening, we sat down for dinner as usual, and I casually mentioned that I had scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. I told him it was just for a routine checkup on our wills and estate planning. Michael didn't react much. He was always content to leave things like that to me, but I could see a flicker of something in his eyes. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. The next few weeks passed in a haze. Michael continued his work, and I continued mine. But in the background, I was preparing for something much bigger. I was getting ready for the fight of my life. I had everything I needed. Now I just had to wait for the right moment. The days passed in a monotonous blur, and though I kept a facade of normalcy, inside I was anything but calm. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper of betrayal, of secrets buried beneath the surface. Every time I looked at Michael, I couldn't shake the sense that I was no longer looking at my husband, the man I had built a life with, but at a stranger. I still didn't confront him. That wasn't part of the plan. No, I needed to do this methodically, without emotion clouding my judgment. This was not about vindication in the heat of the moment. It was about control, taking control of what had been taken from me, of the life we had built together, and turning the tables. It had been 3 weeks since I first discovered the trust agreement, and since then, I had quietly gathered every scrap of information I could find. The documents, the receipts, the email exchanges, each piece of evidence was another thread in a much larger, more intricate web. It was when I was going over the documents again, sitting at the kitchen table one late afternoon, that the full scope of Michael's deception hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just about saving money for a new life. No, it was much worse than that. Michael hadn't been setting aside funds for himself, not entirely. It was all for someone else, someone I didn't even know. As I reviewed the transfers one last time, I realized that over the last 7 years, Michael had been sending money to the same account, always in small increments, never too large to raise suspicion, but always consistent. The amounts were modest, but the frequency was shocking. Every month, without fail, he had sent money. Sometimes it was a few $100s, other times it was more, but it always added up. 7 years. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. 7 years of lies, of betrayal. 7 years of a marriage that had existed only in the surface of things. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the name on the account. It wasn't just some random person. No, it was someone Michael had been actively working with, someone he trusted enough to open a trust account under their name, and someone who would receive this money. The trust agreement had confirmed what I feared. It was a person who wasn't part of our life, not even on the periphery. They weren't a friend or a family member. They were someone entirely separate. And now, as I went through the pages of the agreement, I understood that the trust wasn't just for some business deal. It was an escape plan. Michael had been preparing to leave me. He had been planning this new life for years. I couldn't just ignore it. This wasn't a simple case of him mismanaging our finances. No, this was much deeper. Michael had created a backup plan, a secret life that didn't include me. My hands shook as I looked through the documents one more time, making sure I hadn't missed anything. The account number, the contact emails. There was a trail here, a trail that I could follow all the way back to the beginning. The pieces fit together too perfectly, and suddenly, everything made sense. Michael had been slowly preparing to step into another life, one where I didn't exist. He had been systematically pulling away from our shared future, not just emotionally, but financially. He thought I wouldn't notice. He thought I wouldn't be capable of finding this, that I would be too trusting, too caught up in the routine of our life. But I wasn't stupid. I wasn't blind, and I wasn't about to let him get away with it. I stared at the papers before me. The weight of it all was beginning to settle in, but I didn't feel anger or betrayal. I felt something else, something colder. I felt the sharp, calculating focus of a woman who would not be underestimated. I could almost hear his voice in my head. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. I'll fix everything." But the truth was, he never thought I would look. He never thought I would dig deep enough. But I had. And now I had the upper hand. I set the documents aside and stood up, my mind already racing ahead. The next step was clear. I had to prepare. I would need more than just information. I would need a strategy. I would need to act quickly before he suspected anything. The lawyer's words echoed in my mind. If he files for divorce, you will be left with nothing. But if you take control now, you can turn this around. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The following week, I met with the lawyer again. We discussed everything in detail: the documents, the trust agreement, the bank statements. He was quiet, listening as I explained what I had discovered. His demeanor was professional, but I could sense the weight of the case unfolding in his mind as well. The fact that he's hiding money and setting up a separate account under someone else's name changes things significantly. The lawyer said, "This isn't just a case of mismanaged funds. This is fraudulent behavior. You have grounds for legal action." I nodded, my heart still steady. I wasn't ready to act just yet. I needed to be patient. I needed to wait for the right moment. Michael had made his move. Now it was time for me to make mine. The lawyer advised me to start documenting everything: every email, every transfer, every piece of communication. He also suggested I prepare for the possibility of a divorce, even though that wasn't yet my primary focus. Michael wasn't going to expect me to be the one who filed for divorce. No, I was going to hold all the cards. I left the lawyer's office with a sense of purpose, feeling like a chess player who had just made the first strategic move. I wasn't about to let Michael's deception ruin everything we had built, not when I had the upper hand. It was time to dig deeper. It was time to prepare for what was coming. As the days passed, I continued to gather information, always staying one step ahead. Michael remained unaware of my investigation, convinced that I was none the wiser. But I knew better. I knew everything. And now all I had to do was wait for the right moment to strike. I had never been one to rush into things. I'd learned long ago that the most important decisions, especially the ones that could change your life, required time, patience, and strategy. The cold, calculating part of me had taken over, and though part of me felt like a stranger in my own skin, I didn't allow myself to waver. I couldn't afford to. Over the next few weeks, I meticulously continued my investigation. I tracked every deposit, every withdrawal, every transaction. The more I uncovered, the more the picture became clear. It wasn't just about the money he had been saving for a new life. It was about control. Michael wanted to control the narrative, control the way our lives were shaped, and he wanted to do it without me. What he didn't realize was that, with each move he made, he was playing right into my hands. I wasn't going to let him take the house, the life we built, and the years of memories we had accumulated together. No, I would fight back, and I would do it on my terms. I began gathering everything I could: PDF reports, emails, receipts, bank statements, and the trust agreements I had painstakingly found. Every document told the same story. Michael was preparing to leave, and he was doing it with someone else's name. The trust account wasn't just a placeholder, it was a lifeline, a way for him to shield his assets from me. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The next step was critical. I had to meet with a lawyer, a better one, someone who specialized in financial settlements. It was a step I had been hesitant to take, but it was necessary. The lawyer I'd seen earlier had given me good advice, but I knew I needed someone who could navigate the legal intricacies of what Michael was trying to do. I had a trusted contact, a woman who had been recommended to me years ago when I was considering the possibility of business investments. Her name was Jessica, and she had an air of professionalism that made people take her seriously. She was exactly who I needed right now. We met in her office, a sleek space with glass walls and modern furniture. It felt sterile, but I appreciated the calm, neutral environment. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, I dove right in, laying out the evidence I had gathered so far. Jessica's expression remained neutral as I spoke. She took notes, asking clarifying questions when necessary. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and regarded me thoughtfully. "You've done your homework, Linda. This is good," she said, her voice steady and professional. What Michael has done goes far beyond just bad financial planning. This is a deliberate attempt to hide assets and deceive you. You've got more than enough to go on. My heart fluttered, but I quickly reined in my emotions. It wasn't about emotions anymore. This was about control, and Jessica was on my side. What can we do? I asked, my voice low but firm. Jessica didn't hesitate. The first thing we'll need to do is file for divorce. It sounds counterintuitive, but that's the best way to lock down his assets and prevent him from doing anything further without your knowledge. Once we file, we'll have a temporary restraining order on the financial assets, especially the ones he's hiding. If he's got a separate account under another name, we'll subpoena the records and we'll get those accounts frozen immediately. I nodded slowly. I'm not in a hurry. I want to make sure I have everything lined up first. Good, she said. Take your time, but not too much. Once he realizes you're onto him, he'll make a move. You need to be ready for that. It was clear that Jessica understood exactly what I was dealing with. She didn't promise me that I would get everything I wanted, but she gave me the tools to fight for it, and that's all I needed. I wasn't looking for a guarantee, but I was looking for a way to win. And now, I had it. For the next few weeks, I went into a kind of quiet frenzy. I continued to monitor Michael's every move. I found myself becoming more methodical, more precise. I cataloged everything: his emails, his calls, his social media activity. If there was any part of his life he wasn't telling me about, I was going to find it. The idea that he thought I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't understand what he was doing, was infuriating. But it was also empowering. He was playing a game, and I was going to win. One afternoon, as I sat in the study going through another set of documents, I overheard Michael's voice coming from the other room. He was speaking on the phone, his tone low but urgent. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught one sentence clearly. I'll just take a couple of weeks. I need to clear my head. Then we can finalize everything. My heart skipped. He was going to leave. I knew it. I didn't let myself feel anything. He had made his choice, and now I was making mine. I didn't let him know that I had heard. I didn't let him know that I was prepared. It was time. The moment had come. The following day, I sent an email to Jessica. I outlined everything: what I had found, what Michael had been doing, and what I planned to do next. She responded almost immediately. Prepare to file. Once he leaves, we'll act. It's now or never. I took a deep breath. The game was on. Michael thought he was leaving for his new life, but in reality, it was me who was about to change everything. He thought he had the power, but he was wrong. I wasn't going to be the woman left behind. I was going to take control. And this time, I wouldn't lose. A month passed. In that time, Michael continued with his charade, doing his best to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. The casual dinners, the quiet evenings by the fire, the discussions about our future. It was as if nothing had changed. I didn't let on that I knew what was really going on. If anything, I played my role to perfection, smiling politely, making small talk, keeping up appearances. He was preparing to leave me, but I wasn't going to let him know that I was already several steps ahead of him. Then one evening, after dinner, he said it, those words I'd been waiting for. I need time to think, he said, his voice flat, as if he were discussing a mundane matter. I've been feeling disconnected lately. I'll be gone for a couple of weeks just to clear my head. It's been a lot, and I need some space. I nodded, not letting a single emotion slip through. Okay, I said simply. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. And just like that, he was gone. I didn't need to ask where he was going. I already knew. The new life he had been carefully crafting, the one where he was finally free from the constraints of our marriage, was just a plane ticket away. He would leave, set up his little sanctuary, and start over without me. But as I sat alone in the house that night, I realized something. He hadn't accounted for me. He hadn't understood who I was. The woman he thought he could deceive wasn't going to let him walk away with everything. No, I would be the one to control this narrative now. The next morning, I took my first step toward securing my future. I met with Jessica again, this time in a small, discreet cafe near her office. The air inside was cool, and the murmur of conversations around us helped to create a cocoon of privacy. As I sat down across from her, I could tell she knew what had happened before I even said a word. "Michael's gone?" she asked, her voice a soft murmur. I nodded. "He left this morning. He says he needs space. I'm sure he's planning his escape." Jessica studied me carefully, then pushed a folder across the table toward me. "Everything is in order. We've got the documents, the financial statements, the trust accounts, and the divorce petition ready to go. We'll file it the moment we get confirmation of his whereabouts." My heart skipped, but I kept my face steady. "How long will it take?" Jessica took a moment before answering. "It depends on how he reacts. If he challenges it, we'll need to move quickly. If he doesn't, we'll need to act just as swiftly. The goal is to make sure the accounts are frozen, the assets are divided fairly, and that he can't hide anything from you." I looked at the folder in front of me, feeling a strange sense of power. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment when the truth would come out and Michael would have to face the consequences of his actions. "I'm ready," I said, my voice low but firm. Jessica nodded. "I'll keep everything confidential. You don't need to do anything on your end until we file. But remember, the clock is ticking." As I left the cafe, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted, but a different kind of weight was settling in. The kind of weight that comes with knowing that everything I had worked for, everything I had planned, was now set into motion. I spent the next few days preparing myself for what was to come. I knew that the process wasn't going to be easy, it wasn't going to be quick, but it was going to be thorough, and Michael wouldn't be able to escape the truth. He had made a grave mistake by underestimating me. He had thought I was the naive, trusting woman he had married. He had assumed that I wouldn't notice the subtle cracks in the foundation, the way he'd built his plans on secrets and lies. But now, those lies were going to come to light. As the days passed, Michael stayed away. He called a few times, but the conversations were vague and distant. He kept telling me that he needed space, that he would be back soon, that this was all just a phase. I played along, letting him think that I was still the same woman he had left behind. But in the quiet of my home, I was anything but the same. I was focused, I was determined, and I was prepared to do whatever it took to ensure that he didn't get away with what he had done. The next few weeks were a blur. I continued to gather documents, proof, and evidence, just in case anything slipped through the cracks. Jessica was working behind the scenes, ensuring that all the legal aspects were taken care of. I didn't check in with her constantly. I didn't need to. I knew she was on top of everything. And then, one day, I received an email from her. "It's time." I sat still for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. The time had come to take action. Michael had played his hand, and now it was mine to play. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. It was time to file. As I walked into the courthouse that afternoon, a strange sense of finality washed over me. The building was cold and impersonal, its marble floors reflecting the harsh overhead lights. But I didn't mind. This was where Michael's world would begin to unravel. This was where the truth would emerge. I signed the papers, filed the divorce petition, and submitted the evidence that would make sure everything he had hidden was brought into the light. The process was swift, and the legal team moved quickly. Within hours, the account Michael had set up in another name was frozen. The trust account, which he thought he could use to escape, was locked down, and just like that, his new life came to a screeching halt. As the days passed, Michael's calls became more frequent, more desperate. He had no idea what was happening. He thought he could outsmart me, but he didn't realize that I had been 3 steps ahead all along. I wasn't playing for revenge. I wasn't seeking petty satisfaction. I was playing for control. And now I had it. It didn't take long for Michael to realize what was happening. The email from his bank was the first warning, a notification that the account he'd been feeding for years had been frozen and that no transactions would be allowed without further authorization. The moment he saw that, everything started to unravel. He called me almost immediately. His voice was frantic, sharp with panic. "Linda, what's going on? The account. It's frozen. Why? What did you do?" I didn't say anything at first. I let the silence stretch between us, letting him stew in his own confusion. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when he'd finally have to face the consequences of his deceit. "I didn't do anything, Michael," I said, my voice calm and collected. "But it seems that there's an issue with the account. I'm sure you'll figure it out." He was quiet for a moment, his breathing heavy. "I don't know what you're talking about. Why would they freeze it? There's no reason to—" "You've been keeping secrets, Michael," I interrupted, my words cold, calculated. "For years. You thought I wouldn't find out, didn't you? You thought I wouldn't notice the money disappearing, the little lies you've been telling. But you were wrong." I could hear him stumbling over his words on the other end of the line. "Linda, this isn't what you think. I can explain. Just give me a chance. Please. You don't know everything. It's not what it looks like." I almost laughed. How pathetic, how predictable. For 7 years he had been sneaking behind my back, thinking he could play me for a fool. And now, when the tables had turned, he was begging for mercy. "I know enough," I said firmly, my voice unwavering. "I know about the trust account, about the money you've been siphoning away. I know about the new life you've been planning with someone else. But let's not pretend this is just about money. This is about trust, Michael, and you've broken it." He stayed silent for a moment, and I could hear the frustration building in him, his control slipping. "Linda, please," he said again, but this time it was almost a plea. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I didn't want to hurt you." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. "It's too late for that. You've made your choice. You thought I wouldn't understand, that I wouldn't notice, but I've been paying attention, and now you'll have to face the consequences." I ended the call without another word. The following days were filled with a flurry of legal activity. Michael's lawyer reached out trying to negotiate, but I wasn't interested in anything he had to say. I had already made my decision. There was no compromise, no second chance, not after everything Michael had done. I was a woman who knew her worth, and I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything while I was left with nothing. The court hearings were set in motion quickly. Michael's team tried to argue that the account was his, that it was a separate entity from our shared finances, but we had the documents, the proof that the money had come from our joint account. We had the bank statements, the receipts, and the copies of the trust agreement. Everything was neatly laid out, each detail corroborated with the others. Michael's side attempted to twist the facts, claiming that I was overreacting, that the money had been for future plans that I couldn't possibly understand. They even tried to argue that the trust account was a personal investment, something that wasn't meant for me to know about. But all of that fell apart when the evidence was presented. It became clear that Michael had been preparing for his exit from our marriage for years. He had been saving money under the guise of a friend, moving small amounts into the trust account so that it wouldn't be noticeable. His plan was to leave me with nothing, to set up his life elsewhere while I was left to pick up the pieces. But his plan had a flaw, and that flaw was me. I wasn't the woman he thought I was. I wasn't the woman who would sit idly by while he tore apart everything we had built. The judge listened carefully as both sides presented their cases, but when the documents were reviewed, when everything was laid out in front of him, it became obvious that Michael had been deceptive. The judge called for a recess to review the evidence further, but I already knew how it would play out. I sat in the courtroom, calm and composed, my mind clear. This was the moment of truth. This was when everything would change. When the judge returned, he made his ruling. Michael would not only lose access to the money he had tried to hide, but the court also decided that all assets would be split equally, including the house. The shared accounts would be frozen, and the funds would be divided in a way that ensured I was not left with nothing. It was over for Michael. His new life had been nothing more than a fantasy, and now he had to face the reality of his actions. I could tell that Michael was in shock. His lawyer tried to argue, but the decision was final. The assets would be divided, and Michael would have to find a way to pay for the costs of his retreat on his own. There would be no escape, no second chance. He had lost everything he thought he could take for himself. As the weeks went by, Michael's life continued to spiral. The apartment he had rented was a far cry from the life he had imagined with his new start, and every time he called, it was to beg for another chance, another opportunity to explain himself. But there was no explanation that would make this right. I didn't speak to him much anymore. I didn't need to. He had made his bed, and now he would lie in it. And as for me, I was free. I had control. I had the house, the financial security, and the knowledge that I had played the game smarter than he ever could have imagined. Money can be hidden, but not the truth, and not a wife like me. It had been 2 months since the final court ruling. The dust had settled, and Michael had long since left the house. I could almost feel the weight lifting off my shoulders with each passing day. The house was still the same. It always had been. A place we had built together, filled with memories of shared moments, long talks, and even longer silences. But now it felt different. It felt like mine. Michael's retreat, the one he had been planning for so long, was no longer his to take. The money he had so carefully hidden away was gone, tied up in the legal battle that had stripped him of everything. His new life was nothing but a cruel joke. He had thought he could escape, that I would be none the wiser, but he had underestimated me. Now, he was living in a small, sterile apartment, trying to piece together a life that would never compare to what he once had. I had been the one who knew how to manage, how to control what mattered: our finances, our lives, and most importantly, myself. I hadn't reacted with anger or frustration when I found out what he was doing. I hadn't screamed or begged. I had simply watched, waited, and calculated every step with precision. When the time was right, I made my move. Michael didn't see it coming. He thought I would crumble, that I would fall apart and beg him to stay. But I had been stronger than he gave me credit for. He had treated me like a fool, like someone who would never figure out his little games. And when the truth came out, he was the one left exposed. The finality of the court decision wasn't a victory that needed to be celebrated. It was just a matter of fact, a statement of what had always been true. The assets were split, the house was mine, and I was in control. And as for Michael, his money was gone, his future uncertain, and his pride shattered. There was no turning back. I had received a call from Michael a week after the ruling. He tried to sound confident, but there was a tremor in his voice that made it clear how broken he truly was. "Linda, you don't have to do this. We could still fix things, you and me. We could start fresh. I made mistakes, but I'm willing to make it right." I didn't hesitate. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was simply done. "No, Michael, It's too late for that. I'm done. His silence on the other end of the phone spoke volumes. There was nothing more to say. No more promises, no more lies. He had no ground left to stand on. His new life was nothing more than a mirage, and I wasn't interested in being part of his illusion anymore. The day I finalized everything, closed the books, put the paperwork in order, and ensured my financial future, was just like any other. The house felt more like a sanctuary now. It had always been a home, but now it was a place where I could finally breathe freely, where I could take back control of my life. I walked through each room, running my fingers over the familiar surfaces. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, everything was the same, yet it was different. It was mine now. I had built this life with Michael, but I was going to live the rest of it on my own terms. I wasn't angry. I didn't need to feel vindicated or get back at him. What mattered now was that I had learned something about myself. I had learned that I didn't need anyone to define me. Not Michael, not the house, not the money. None of that mattered. What mattered was who I was and how I chose to live my life going forward. The truth had come to light. Michael had thought he could hide behind his lies, behind his plans for the future that didn't include me. But the truth was stronger than any secret he could keep, and the truth had won. The weeks turned into months, and I settled into my new life with ease. The financial settlement, the house, the quiet control I now had over every decision. It was all more than I had ever expected, but none of it was about the money. It was about the lesson I had learned in patience, in control, and in knowing my own worth. Michael continued to reach out, sending texts, leaving voicemail messages, even trying to knock on the door a few times. But I never answered. There was no need. He had lost his chance. He had lost everything. And I was more than okay, because in the end, I wasn't the one who had to run away and hide. I wasn't the one who had to create a new life. I already had mine.